possible to the extent that the subject stays awake. Now, there's an apparent contradiction here. Last week, I told you that people in my laboratory and in other laboratories as well have gotten priming effects for surgical patients under an adequate plane of general anesthesia. But in this study, which again is, to my knowledge, the only study of its kind, you get nothing, okay? If subjects can show priming while they're anesthetized, why can't they show priming while they're asleep? There's an apparent contradiction here. I think, again, this is something that really needs to be resolved empirically, hint, hint, and that is we're looking at two different kinds of priming. In our anesthesia studies, we were using a repetition priming paradigm, okay? There were paired associates of various kinds, but the way we did the test, the priming effect could have been mediated by a perception-based representation of the prime. All there had to be done was some kind of physical analysis of the prime. In Wood's study, the priming tests count as semantic priming. In order to get from war to peace, P-E-A-C-E, as opposed to P-I-E-C-E, in order to get from metal to gold, as opposed to silver or platinum or whatever, you've got to encode something about the meaning of these words. And it's possible that in general anesthesia, there is enough cognitive wherewithal to permit repetition priming, but not semantic priming. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, there are no studies showing semantic priming in general anesthesia. It might be that if Wood had tested repetition priming as well as semantic priming, he might have gotten repetition priming. Okay, we just don't know right now. As far as I know, nobody's done this. The difference between the two kinds of experiments is that in the anesthesia experiments, the patients naturally fluctuated in their plane of anesthesia, okay? You're always anesthetized when you're in surgery, but you do drift up a little bit, and then the anesthesiologist puts you back down, and then you drift up a little bit, and then puts you back down. We were playing this tape to the patients over and over and over and over again, an average of 67 times in a 50-minute surgery. And it's possible that they came up a little bit and were able to pick up some of the material from the tape. Wood made sure that that could not happen in his study because he eliminated from consideration any stimulus that was presented concurrent to any sign of physiological arousal. So again, it's entirely possible that if we had done this, either if we had done the anesthesia, maintaining a constant deep plane of anesthesia, or if in Wood's study he had allowed just a little bit of fluctuation, natural arousal in sleep, he might have gotten different kinds of results. But as far as we can tell now, it just doesn't happen at all. Okay, one more aspect of this that's interesting, and that is the problem of memory for dreams. We know that there's an association between stage REM of sleep and dreaming. 70 to 80% of subjects awakened out of stage REM will report that they're having a dream. We know that the average normal sleeper, not the average college student, because you don't get enough sleep, none of you do, okay? But the average person who's not in college and doesn't sleep with his iPhone under his pillow and all of that, is going to have about 5-6 episodes of REM during the night, and because of the strong association between REM and dreaming, we can assume that the average person who gets a decent night's sleep is going to have 4-5 epochs of REM, and therefore at least 4, 5, 6 maybe dreams during the night. But most people, when they awaken, can only remember one dream. Okay? So what happens to all these other kinds of dreams? Or what happens to all the other dreams that you have? The best explanation we have for this at the moment is that for a variety of reasons, dreams occur in what we would now call working memory, and what used to be called primary or short-term memory. And you need to have some kind of consolidation process to get something that's in working memory or short-term memory into long-term memory where you can record it. And the general idea, I'll go into more detail on this in a minute or two, is that the process of the physiology of REM sleep allows dreams to be staged in working memory, but it effectively prohibits their consolidation into long-term memory where they can be retrieved in the morning. So if that's true, how come you remember any dreams at all? Well, the general idea is that people typically awaken out of stage REM. So if you awaken out of stage REM and you're dreaming in stage REM, you can get that one dream by kind of direct readout from short-term or working memory. But if somebody says, well, do you have any other dreams? Yeah, I can't get to the long-term memories for these dreams because the consolidation didn't happen. Now, there is this proposal, which I find both fascinating and aggravating, that somehow memory for dreams is an instance of state-dependent memory, okay? You all know what state-dependent memory is. In the drug condition, we know from animal and human studies that if subjects learn something under the influence of a psychoactive drug, they'll remember it better if they try to remember it under the influence of a psychoactive drug. There are limits to this. All known psychoactive drugs, with one exception, impair encoding, okay? So it's not the case that you should study with a couple of beers in your hand and then come in and take a test with a couple of beers in your hand on grounds of state-dependent learning. All these psychoactive drugs impair encoding and retrieval processes. The only exception that I know of are stimulant drugs in individuals with well-diagnosed, genuine cases of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Under those conditions, stimulant drugs could actually improve encoding and retrieval, but not under any other circumstances that I know of. So again, the thing to do is to say, well, okay, if that's the case, then let's look at whatever factors there are that obtain in sleep that might affect this so-called consolidation process. And one thing we know is that there are low levels of arousal during slow wave sleep. So if you go into REM, okay, you have a dream, and then you go back into stage NREM, you're not aroused in a way that would allow this consolidation to occur. This hypothesis has actually been tested by what must have been one of the most aggravating experiments ever, a study in which sleepers were allowed to go to sleep, and every time they were awakened, every time they cycled into REM, they were allowed to be in REM for a little while, and then they were awakened with this request about whether they had dreamt or not. Under those circumstances, if you then ask the person when he or she awakens in the morning, tell me what your dreams were, you'll get several dream reports, okay? But that's because the person was awake right after they dreamt, and that high level of cortical arousal, relatively high level of cortical arousal, was enough to permit them to engage in this consolidation process from working memory into short-term memory. And again, there are experiments, old experiments, but still lovely experiments that, for example, compared abrupt versus gradual arousal. If you awaken somebody suddenly out of sleep and then allow them to go back to sleep, they'll remember the dream better in the morning. But if you gradually arouse them, they won't necessarily. Also, if you awaken people and distract them before they give you a dream report, they'll say, yeah, I had a dream, but I can't remember what it was anymore, and they don't remember it in the morning either. So again, anything that you can do to fill this retention interval with something that prevents consolidation will impair long-term memory for dreams. Even then, in these kinds of studies, subjects do show better memory for highly salient dreams. An anxiety-filled dream or a dream that was full of activity, that kind of dream is much more likely to be remembered in the morning than the standard kind of banal kind of dream. Okay. So that's the story on memory for dreams. Again, this is something that we really don't know too much about. These kinds of studies don't get done as much as they should any longer. Most of the work on memory for dreams was done in a period before the advent of modern cognitive psychology. So the theoretical constructs are sometimes a little bit off, but that's basically our understanding of the fate of memory for dreams at the moment. One last problem, empirical problem about sleep mentation that's important, and that is the relationship between stage of sleep and dreaming. You'll remember that the classic finding from Mazurinsky and Kleitman, confirmed by a large number of subsequent studies, is that there is this strong relationship between dreaming and stage REM. If you awaken somebody out of stage REM and you say, were you having a dream? They're very likely to say yes, 70, 80, 90% of the time. If you awaken somebody out of slow wave sleep, stage NREM, and you say, were you having a dream? They're very likely not to say yes, only about 10% of the time. There are claims, however, that this relationship between sleep stage and dreaming is an artifact of the method used in the experiments. In the Mazurinsky and Kleitman study and in other studies that followed up on it, the question put to the subjects was, were you having a dream? To which they said yes or no. But it turns out that you get, leading to the conclusion that there's mental activity during stage REM, but no mental activity during stage NREM. However, if you ask the question just a little bit differently, you get a different set of answers. This is work from David Folks, a pioneering sleep and dreams researcher, spent his career at the University of Wyoming, two studies in which he changed the question. He would awaken people out of stage REM, or he'd awaken them out of stage NREM and just say, what was going on with you? What were you thinking? What were you doing? Okay. Under those circumstances, folks observed that subjects would give reports of some kind of mental activity with a very high frequency in both stage REM and in stage NREM, leading to the idea, basically contradicting the idea that there's no mental activity during so-called slow wave sleep. It all depends, it turns out, on how you're willing to define